please call the roll.
Mayor Williams.
I'm here.
Councilmember Barry. Councilmember Clay. Here. Councilmember Robinson. Councilmember Siemens.
Present.
Councilmember Snipper. Councilmember Wright.
Looks like some people are taking a little longer to get back from August break than others. And I understand that Councilmember Barry will not be here this evening, unexpectedly. And maybe I'll just start with a couple of announcements of things. Some council members might have more information if I cover something, but I just wanted to kind of note that the Folk Festival will be in 2 weeks on Sunday, September 14th at the Tacoma Middle School. The Old Town Street Festival will be Sunday, October 5th in Old Town. The WMATA filed with the FTA, which we will be talking more about in the coming weeks. There's a hearing on Monday, October 6th on Community Development Block Grant application. And there's a Sick of Signs Week, September 20th to 27th, culminating with a New Hampshire Avenue cleanup and ice cream social kind of end of the Sick of Signs Week on September 27th. Also on September 27th from 9 to 11 in the morning is the Friends of Sligo Creek Sweep the Creek. I'd like to note that there is now electrical components, computers and such recycling that the city will be providing year-round rather than that one special pickup that the city did in April of every year. So if people have those items, they can drop them up at Public Works. Also at Public Works, there's now the expanded recycling program, which picks up numbers 2, 3, 4, and 5 plastics, and also narrow neck number 1s. Also note that the fire station groundbreaking is going to be Thursday, October 23rd at 11 a.m. Excuse me. And finally, I'd just like to note that the Morrissey Mulligan Madness Golf Tournament is going to be September 22nd at 9 a.m. at the Redgate Course in Rockville. So if somebody would like to play in that, they should contact Friends of the Library. And I'm assuming some people have additional things to note and maybe expanded comments on anything that I covered, since we're all just back from 5 weeks of not seeing each other. Councilmember Siemens?
I would just like to let the community know that Del Ziegler, who was a rec department director many years ago and has been active in the city. Most recently, she has been, or I should say still, she's been organizing the Independence Day Parade and fireworks events. Underwent surgery 2 weeks ago. She had some cancer removed. It was found to be malignant, but they believe they've removed most of it, and she'll be undergoing radiation treatment soon. She's recovering right now in a nursing home, and anyone who would like to send her a card can get the address from my wife, Joyce, at 301-565-0190. Thank you.
And the city will be sending something?
I think we did today.
Okay, good. Anybody else? Councilmember Clay.
Well, I had a great summer. I'm happy to be back. I went to California and legally married my partner of 19 years.
Congratulations.
On August 15th. So, when we know what's going to happen with the series of hurricanes that are in the Gulf right now, I'm going to plan the reception here, but I kind of got to wait to see.
Happens, you don't know
I have to wait to see what
here.
my work schedule is going to continue to be like for the next couple of weeks. Let's see. In other news in the ward, we had a couple of meetings around the Auburn, Glazewood, Devonshire, Larch area about traffic safety and other neighborhood issues after the accident that occurred on New Hampshire Avenue. where the woman was run over by the car. And that has sparked more conversation about neighborhood safety. The police chief came out, and we had a very good conversation with the police chief. We had a second meeting where the public works director came out, and we talked about other public safety, the ever-present traffic calming, but we talked a lot about sidewalks. And I am hearing repeatedly from people that they would really like to see some plan from the city around sidewalks, one way or the other, what it's going to be, how you get them, are we going to do it all together? And they would really like to have that conversation. And I've heard that from several people across the community, so I don't know if other folks in the other wards are hearing that as well, but I certainly do, and I know Doug Berry and I have talked about it a lot. The other issue that I'd really like to have us address sometime in the really, really near future is the issue of being able to store the pods on the streets for 6 months. We have a few pods in our neighborhood, but there's one that's actually a really significant hazard, and it's the one that is at Lincoln where Boyd comes down into it. It's a large intersection, so it's a three-way intersection, and it's in an interior street, but it has those kind of broad sweeping corners, and so people make those turns where they cross into the other side of the street as they go on up, and they're heading up a hill, so they're getting up speed, and there's this pod right there, and it's really hard to see. And the people on either side are having a hard time pulling out without knowing whether or not there's a car there. We've had our folks who are out walking their animals out there with their kids have reported a lot of problems with just the cars come up on them right away because they're around on the side of the pod and they're kind of squished up against the pod. And then this summer, while I was out at some point, one of the neighbors right there, his dog apparently was hit by a landscaping truck while he was walking it, and the dog was killed, and the landscaping truck just went right on by. So I don't know if we can do something about that particular site, if we can do anything about that, because it's in particular such a dangerous issue, but in general, I think being able to park a pod in the front of your house for 6 months is something that we need to address before we get more. We have 4 or 5 of them in Ward 2.
Okay.
Thank you.
Councilmember Wright.
Thank you. 3 things. First, I wanted to say I had a great summer also, but I'm happy to be back. One of the interesting things I saw that I think could be an improvement for our community is something simple that I saw in Cape Cod, actually, which is a way for us to do classy, attractive signage, but allow rotating signs so that different event signage can occur or information about mulch sales can occur. And basically it was very straightforward. There were these 2 wooden posts into the ground, probably put in very securely and level and plumb, but that had grooves in them. And basically you had these placards, and the whole thing was white, so there's very clearly a standard that the town had set that people had to use a certain font size so it was visible, but it looked uniform, and you just slid the placards down into those grooves, and you could have 2 or 3 announcements stacked up, and you could make this thing as large or small as you wanted it. And it's been a little pet peeve of mine, although I haven't said anything to Daryl about it. The ugly sort of mulch sale signs that blow in the wind. There's one at the corner of Piney Branch and Philadelphia, and I think there's also one up by the co-op. And it just seemed like a very attractive and easy way for us to do signage. And I know the mayor is not in favor of things being tied to the railing out in front of the community center. I'm in that same camp. So I think it would be, we could look at a few of those around the city. It would be a pretty low-cost option. I imagine probably Public Works could construct them themselves and install them themselves. 2 more serious issues. One is wanted to let everyone know in my ward that I'm working on a date for myself, Safe Tacoma, and the presidents of the Citizens Association to attend a meeting with the chief. I've also invited, and we'll try and schedule appropriately with Councilmember Robinson and the head of WACO to have a discussion about what we can plan for the fall and when it gets darker earlier, and what we know is a reoccurring issue where usually street crime picks up as a result of those it getting darker earlier, and want to talk with the chief about what his proactive plan is to address that. I'm sure he has one, but also what the neighborhood associations can do proactively to help in that around education, or make sure that they're prepared with patrols that they're going to do, or walking groups in the metro, whatever it's going to be. And then lastly, want to let everyone know in the ward that after the national election in mid-November, I'm planning to have a ward-wide update and discussion with everybody. I'll be forthcoming with a date on that, but I look forward to as many people as possible coming to meet in the community center from Ward 1 to talk about the issues affecting the ward and the city and have a healthy discussion. Thanks.
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. I too had a great summer and got to go to El Salvador, where I served in the Peace Corps. I haven't been back in 40 years. It was fascinating to go see what changes have occurred there. Most of the changes were good. I don't know if ubiquitous cell phones would qualify as good or bad. Perhaps they're both. But they were everywhere. Close to 6 million Salvadorans and 4.5 million cell phones was the numbers I heard. I don't know how accurate they are. But. And we went to Costa Rica for a wedding. Had a great time. And then to Oregon, where my in-laws celebrated their 60th wedding anniversary. And when I was in Astoria, Oregon, they were having a street fair. And I got this great idea for Tacoma Park. All of the rest of you who traveled and stolen ideas from elsewhere. They, at one of these regular annual fairs, they got the city manager cooked up this idea, and I can give you his name and number if you want more detail. Cooked up this idea to have all the city departments come out, and it was especially interesting to have Public Works, the fire department, the police department, and so on, because they did demonstrations. And the finance, I know this sounds really interesting, the finance committee, finance department had one of the really most interesting booths there, actually. The staff got all interested in what they could do and share with the public and so on, and the public were absolutely fascinated. Of course, they didn't hand out money or anything, but wondering where your tax dollars go and all that sort of thing turned out to be really, really good idea. And I think we haven't occasionally done, I know the rec department's done, climb on the trucks or whatever you call it, kind of activities before, but having the whole city, all the departments do it, really brought out a lot of people. It was kind of something for everybody. And then the other is my becoming regular question about the Maple Avenue Bridge. Do you have an update on the Maple Avenue Bridge? I can wait till council to city manager comments if you want, unless it's short.
No, it's short. The contractor came out. It had been primed and painted. They were going to come back out and do some additional treatment in light of the problems that I think both you and Councilmember Wright had noted. They're not quite sure why there were any signs of rust, because their indication was that it had been properly treated, but clearly there's some remedial action that's needed by the contractor.
That's for the rust.
Correct.
And then the second part was roughing up the surface.
Right.
It's a wooden plank surface. It gets very slippery in the wind.
Right. It's on, I know the right-of-way department's work plan. I don't know, Councilmember Snipper, it has been done yet, but I had asked Ms. Braithwaite if she could please try to get that done by this evening. So I'll check with her tomorrow. I'm not sure if she did it in the last few weeks or not.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah, good to see, we're glad to be back, but it sure was fun to be away part of the evening. And it was nice to have a month off. I didn't go out of town much, although I went up to New England with my spouse and went to Shebig Island, which has just achieved independence last year from the town of Cumberland in near Portland, Maine. And we also went to Keene, New Hampshire, and I talked with the city manager on the island of Shebig, and that was a lot of fun. They're a small island which is a city now, and they might have some hints for us. I don't know. As far as ward issues goes, there will be a meeting coming up for Ward 3, mostly for SS Carroll, about Tacoma Junction. There's a new vendor who wants to put a truck with a restaurant kind of selling food from a truck up there somewhere, and we need to get a grip on where the best place would be. This week is a thumbs up, thumbs down week for turning Kansas into a one-way, going up instead of down, because that little stretch of Kansas between Allegheny and Cockrell has been the site of many slipping accidents over the years, and we're weighing that. I'm hoping to have a ward-wide kind of budget information session, so that I can bring as the budget progresses, we can talk about that in Ward 3. I was asked several times about the city's environmental impact and how we're addressing that, and I asked Daryl Braithwaite of Public Works if she had some numbers about that. She's going to get back to me, but has some good insights into how our use of energy how we've been addressing our use of energy, and we've had an energy reduction program since 93, 94, although I don't think we've reduced the amount of energy we've used. So I'm hopeful that we can get more aggressive as the year goes by, and maybe even reduce the amount of energy we reuse. But we'll see what Daryl says about that. And finally, my spouse went to Spain with some college friends, and went to Barcelona, and that's in a province called Catalonia. And I'm part Basque. My mom was half Basque. And the Basques, I kind of hold near and dear to my heart, because they're a fiercely independent sort. But the Catalonians are on the other side of the Pyrenees, and they're also fiercely independent, but they're taking a little different tack, which also might be have a little lesson in it for us. They say the Basques want to blow things up, which is partly true, unfortunately. But they take a different tack, and that is their intent is to become an economic powerhouse, so that they can gain independence from Spain in some measure in that way. And I thought that was a pretty good alternative. So let's have Tacoma Park be some kind of powerhouse. That's how I feel when I come back. Thank you.
Okay. There are no additional agenda items. Just a quick scheduling update that people might want to think about some ways a couple of months down the road, whenever we get to the point of deciding exactly what we're going to do in the reconstruction of this room, and get to the point where we're letting a contract and actually going to have the work done, that we won't be meeting in this room for some period of time.
Wow.
And we'll have the opportunity to think about some different venues or different ways that we might want to meet. We always have the fallback of the Azalea Room, that has some of the infrastructure needed for meetings there, and there's some ways that city staff knows that they can make that room work. But I had talked during the election campaign last fall about having some ways for the city to interact with residents in ways other than formal meetings, and so I feel like that may be the perfect time to have some of those. So if people can start thinking about ways that we might do that, ways that you think would be valuable, and we can start thinking about that in anticipation of that time. I have no indication at this point what the time frame is going to be. Hopefully sooner than later it'll be some months down the road. The meeting next week, we're going to be having update about Verizon Fios availability, and we're also going to be having a presentation from the Council of Governments on the draft National Capital Region Climate Report, and then if we want to provide comments on that, those are due September 30th. So we'll get that presentation next week. I also believe that the city manager is going to be not here for that meeting, and then she and the deputy city manager will be here, not here on the 22nd, because they'll be at ICMA. So we have 2 upcoming meetings where people other than the city manager will be here. On that meeting on the 22nd, a good bit of that meeting is going to be devoted to police issues, including update on Safe Tacoma, report from the city's crime analyst, and a couple of other items as well. And we will not be meeting on the 5th Monday of the month, September 29th, because Rosh Hashanah begins that evening at sundown. So that's a brief recap of where we're headed for the rest of the month. And the next item is adoption of the minutes. We've got copies of June 16th and 30th and July 7th. Do I hear a move to approve those minutes?
Second.
I hear moved by Councilmember Snipper, seconded by Councilmember Seaman. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? The ayes have it. We're now at public comment period. Time set aside for any member of the public who would like to make any comments. And I believe somebody's at the podium.
My name's Pat Lovelace, 7620 Maple Avenue, Tacoma Park. I want to welcome you all back to being in the chambers again, serving our city with pride again. Looking forward to being with you again, including you, Terry Seaman. It's good to have you back in your regular seat. And also, I'd like a couple of questions I have. One is, are we planning on doing any relief drive for the victims of Hurricane Gustav, which did some more damage to the southeast states, the Gulf states? We're planning on doing any more assistance drives for them this year? And also, people have been asking me, when is the deadline for registering to vote this year? Because I want to get as many people as possible to vote. Anyone out there who's watching this tonight, I want you to check with all your friends to see if they are registered to vote and try and get them to come down to the polls. Because this is going to be the most historic election of all time. Of all time, literally. Whether you're Republican or whether you're Democrat. A Republican has a woman running on the ticket, and that's probably why he's got her running. And the Democrats have a black African American running on the ticket, which is a really good example of what can happen when people stand up for their rights and are active. And I'd like to see as many people in the spirit of Obama and in the spirit of Martin Luther King stand up and be active this election year. Stand up against crime. Stand up for your neighbor next door. Stand up for the downtrodden, the handicapped, the people who just can't quite make it. If I can do it in the condition I'm in, I want to tell people that they can do it too. You know, I didn't go through that open heart surgery just to watch my country go down the toilet. I went through that so I can continue to work for peace, to work for justice, and to help other people out there realize the value of working for peace, working for justice, and registering to vote. It's only 63 more days until the general election and when we decide who our next president of the United States is going to be. And we have to take our responsibility. If you're over 18 and you want to be an adult, put the beer down, pick up the ballot, and come out and register to vote. I'll be out there working the polls, so I expect to see as many people out there as possible. We'll have the peace sign out there, standing for Tacoma Park and the rest of this country. So we did a lot to get Obama running. Let's stand up and show that we can get him in office. Please, Thank you very much. Rally around us all, Tacoma. We will win. Thank you.
And Pat, the deadline for registering to vote is October 14th.
October the 14th, remember? Register to vote.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Is there any other public comment?
Huh?
Just seeing if there's anybody else. But I don't see any, so we will move to the city manager's comments.
All right, I'd like to start by giving our new Gazette reporter an opportunity to introduce himself. Can I just stand up and say that?
Hi, it's nice to meet you all again. I'm Jeremy Aries. I'm going to be working for the Gazette from the Tacoma Park. And I believe I've been in touch with some of you. Spoke briefly on the phone. I've left some messages for you, Mayor. Working rather than talk yet. And I've spoken to you.
Welcome.
So look forward to working with you. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
On a side note, I think the council's aware of this, but a former member of the Tacoma Park Police Department, Officer Stanley McLean, passed away during the council recess. Councilmember Siemens and I have been in contact about the council possibly doing a mayoral proclamation or a resolution or something honoring Officer McLean's past service to the city. Just a couple updates for the council. Staff is in the process of working on a number of MOUs related to items that the council approved funding for in the FY09 budget. Sarah Danes is working with the Tacoma Foundation. This is related to the Mosaic project, trying to prepare a draft MOU that we will be bringing back to the council. It's a condition of basically providing them grant funding, similar to what you all did for Safe Tacoma Incorporated. During the council recess, I met with Lorraine Pearsall and Sabrina Barron of Historic Tacoma. Similarly, we'll be bringing forward an MOU sometime this fall for the council. One item that I would like to get clarification on from the council, either this evening or at some future date, is regarding the grant that the city committed to making. When we were approached, it was discussed as being a matching grant for some funding they were pursuing through the Montgomery County Historic Preservation Commission, I believe. My impression from the council discussion is if they were, for some reason, unsuccessful in getting that grant, the council would still be interested in helping them finish the renovation of their building, but I did want to get some clarification on that point as I work with them to prepare a draft MOU for your consideration. So I don't know, Mayor, if you want to deal with that at some future date, or...
I think it's probably worth a little discussion.
Okay.
I don't think we want to just say yes or no
Okay.
at this point.
I can work with the mayor then to get a brief work session scheduled. And I also wanted to get some direction from the council at that time about, I guess, any conditions tied to that funding. I know there had been some discussion about the city possibly being able to use their space for official city functions that we might want to have in the Junction area. In probably the next few weeks, the staff will be meeting with some representatives for the Indicators project. I had suggested to Bruce Baker that it might be appropriate for the council to have some further discussions about its own policy priorities before we would even begin the process of trying to draft an MOU, but we are going to have a preliminary meeting with them probably sometime later this month.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Is my recollection that money also had a matching component to it?
On the Indicators project?
Yeah.
There was, I think they indicated in their comments that they were pursuing some other funding.
They were trying to get money from the county,
and I
but they
think
did not get that money, is my understanding.
Right.
I don't think there was a matching. I don't think they asked for matching money.
Pretty sure when we went, I could go back and look at the tape, but when we went back, went line by line on whether we were going to approve things, that was one of my requirements for me to give my vote to that project, was that there be a matching component. But I think if we want, we can discuss whether we'll forgo that now that the county hasn't come through, but my recollection was that it was the matching component was required.
Yeah, I think Jesse and I can certainly go back through the notes, but it might be an appropriate time when you're talking about the drafting of an MOU for Historic Tacoma to talk about this project at the same time. Two last items. I just wanted to let the council know that relative to the revenue sharing task force on which I serve, the municipal representatives are waiting to receive a draft report from from the county reps, what we had agreed is that they would take the first shot at drafting a report, and then we would review it, and if there's items that obviously we disagree on, we would be incorporating our own comments, but we have yet to receive that draft, so it's just kind of on a hold right now. And then the last item I just wanted to share with the council was kind of catching up on some professional reading over the holiday weekend and came across an article that I thought was rather intriguing, talking about several cities that have used hybrid vehicles for their police patrol cars. So I've shared that with the Public Works Director and the Police Chief and asked them to kind of review that as a possible option for Tacoma Park before we proceed with buying any cars from the FY09 budget. So I'll keep you posted as that research advances.
Hybrid in the sense of electric gas or compressed natural gas?
The article really wasn't all that specific, which is I asked, there was one municipality in Utah and another in New Jersey that they highlighted, and so I've asked the Public Works Director if she could follow up or have her equipment maintenance supervisor follow up to get a little bit more information.
Motorcycles are risk good.
And that's it.
And you're mentioning of the Revenue Task Force. There were, I think, 4 of us who went to the MML Montgomery chapter meeting last Thursday, and that item was part of the briefing, and any of us who were there at that briefing might want to touch base with the city manager and let her know our impressions of what was said and what the reaction was and where things might go from here.
That'd be great.
Any other questions for the city manager? Okay, thank you. We will now move to a special session item, which is a resolution approving the Impact Silver Springs Impact in the Schools project, and I would imagine that Councilmember Siemens would like to introduce that.
Thank you. Impact Silver Spring has been working with parents, minority parents in particular, to help them learn how to deal with schools in the American culture. Many of the parents that they work with are new immigrants to the country, and they also work with American-born minorities also, and then other American parents, but mostly those who have been lower performing on a statistical basis in the schools. And their feeling is that some students fare better not just because they're smarter, but because they know how the system works better and their parents know how the system works better. And so they've been working with some of the parents who have not been engaged with these schools so well. And they have been very successful over the last 2 years since they started this program. They are applying for a grant, and it's a state grant, and they in fact have been awarded that grant, but contingent on having the support of the local government. And so the resolution is intended to voice that support. The reason this is coming to us with kind of a short fuse is because they had previously gotten county council support, thinking that because the school system is a county school system, that would be what the state was looking for. But in fact, the state said no, they wanted the lowest level of local government that the kids live in to support the program. And so that's why I was introducing this and asking that we put it on the agenda so quickly.
And would you like
And
to
I would
move it?
like to move that resolution. Second.
Moved by Councilmember Siemens and a tie between Councilmember Snipper and Councilmember Wright, whoever you want to pick.
Both begin with Ed? No, they don't. That S comes first.
Or you could pick someone.
But Josh is always right.
So are there any council comments on the resolution? Councilmember Snipper.
Other than objecting to Tacoma's art being characterized as the lowest level. I agree wholeheartedly.
Any other comments? Any public comment? Seeing
You
none?
know, Bruce, I have one small comment. It's not about Montgomery County, but a close friend who's in the position of raising his daughter's son, so his grandson, lives in Tacoma, D.C., and what's her title? Ms. Ree's. One of the effects of Ms. Ree's reorganization is to have taken the principal out of Tacoma School on Piney Branch and replaced that principal. And this new principal is very much is reaching out to the parents in the community in a very direct way, which has not been done before. And my friend was very happy that was the case, and is trying to really organize other parents to get engaged with the school. That comes to mind, and I don't know what impact Silver Spring's strategy will be, but he was really enthusiastic, as were a number of others who lived in the school and who were participants. Now, he's a generation older, so I'm looking to him to be especially effective in gathering the forces. They're trying to get whites into the school system because it's been historically an African-American school. So they're trying to bolster they're kind of going the other direction, I suspect. Anyway, I'm glad to let you, I'd be glad to give you his name if that would help, or
Thank you.
pass it on to the Impact Silver Spring.
Any other comments? Okay, all those in favor of the resolution, please say aye.
Aye.
Any noes? The ayes have it. And so now, those who needed the resolution in August
They are
can have it.
probably watching at the moment.
The work session item that will take up the remainder of our regular meeting tonight before we vote to go into closed session is a refinement of council priorities and discussion of next steps. I think we last had a discussion about this on July 7th, and it was helpful to me in reading through the minutes of that meeting that we approved earlier to note one or two things that were in there. And the ones that I wanted to highlight were that Councilmember Wright said you like to focus on goals, not plans, rather than creating a plan to revitalize an area, have a goal to actually revitalize the area. He commented on the importance of prioritization around importance and timing. And Ms. Clay indicated that the council's homework would be to write goals, priorities, and the assumptions each is based on, then the indicators would be filled in last. So I just thought those were two things to recall from our earlier discussion. I think it was a fairly freewheeling discussion, and we felt like we made some progress. Councilmember Wright kindly put some work into a draft proposal which he distributed this afternoon, and we have copies of it here behind the salmon sheet. And I guess I would like to have the type of freewheeling discussion that we had before. That's why we're down here rather than up on the dais, so we can have this discussion and maybe get a lot farther along on this and come up with any next steps that we need to and get a lot of this resolved. And I think I would like to see if Councilmember Wright, having put work in this interim period following on the fine work done by Councilmembers Clay, Siemens, and Snipper before the earlier one, maybe give Councilmember Wright the chance to lead off. And Councilmember Snipper, did you have anything that you wanted to jump in with real quick?
Well, since, as we indicated the last time we had this discussion, the three of us were on board with a old set, I made a copy of those.
Okay,
And,
good.
we can talk about those.
I just I remembered sort of that we had this homework to do supposedly that we gave ourselves, and remember that there was some discussion that we liked the Colorado Springs format, and so all I tried to do was use that format and put together a draft of a sort of set up priorities for strategic plan. I looked through the work that Councilmember Snipper, Clay, and Siemens have done and tried to incorporate most of the things. I'm not sure if I got everything. I guess two other points is I actually started to put some ideas down for indicators, and then also tried to flush out a little bit what we meant by sustainability, livable community, and engaged, responsive, and service-oriented organization. I don't profess that I got them right, but just when I read through that from the draft the city staff put together before, I felt like we needed to be a little bit more specific about what that meant. Because sustainability, for example, even if we were working with others in the community, businesses, residents, seemed very broad, so I wanted to try and articulate those things. And that's the basics of it. I think whether we like this format or the format that the three previous council members worked on, I don't have a strong feeling towards. I think the important thing are having some agreed upon assumptions by which we're trying to make these decisions. I like the idea of the strategy level versus the specific priority level. You all have that in your plan as well. And then I think it's critical that we have, at the end of the day, key indicators for each of those areas that tell us whether we're doing a good job or not a year from now, 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now. So.
Talk.
I'd like a discussion that I'd like to have. It's about the key indicators. I feel pretty...
Do we know what we have what the indicators are pointing for? Do we need to start?
No, this is a broader discussion.
Okay. Good.
Broad level.
That was my next word.
Yep. I want to start broad because I like the layout of having assumption strategies, priority projects, and indicators. I think that's a good way to do it. But before we get too far along, because I know the discussion will be a lot on indicators, I feel pretty strongly we should focus on performance-based indicators that tie into the way the budget is structured, rather than global ones. You know, I just think that global ones, they take a long time to change. They aren't keyed to a specific action that the city did or didn't do, so they don't help us decide whether we should do more or less of whatever we did. If we had an indicator that's tied to a specific city action, then if it worked out well, in terms of the indicator, we know more of that is good. If it didn't work out well, then maybe less of it or end it would be good. So I like the indicators to be tied into the way the city functions and the budget works, rather than broader indicators.
Can I ask a clarifying question about that, just to understand what you're mean? So does that suggest that the indicators should be, because the budget's structured by department, so you're suggesting the indicators would then be department by department, and those would be the only indicators we would have?
Well, not necessarily the only indicators. I think that in performance-based budgeting, the performance indicator is tied to the actual function. So if the budget has so many miles of road are going to be paved in the city, you have a performance indicator where they paved and where they satisfactorily paved. And you would do that for, of course, obviously there are hundreds of city functions. So my idea for how to do this is to start with a few in each department. I'll call it the low-hanging fruit, the ones that are easiest to do first, and get experience doing those kind of indicators. And they would be, they're performance-based, so did it happen, whatever it is, and then you have was it done well kind of thing. Was it done well can be, you ask the participants, did they like the rec program or whatever it might be. Would be key to the specific function. So that's I would prefer those kinds of, not that you wouldn't have any broad indicators, but that they would be complemented by these very performance-based ones.
I would like to voice qualified support of what you're proposing. I think it's important that we do look at things that have something that fits in the structure of the budget, and that means really doing it at a departmental level, I think, makes the most sense, because I envision this a couple of years from now really being a way of helping to allocate our limited resources during the budgeting. But and the qualification I put on my support is, and you kind of qualified it yourself, and that is, I don't think we, at this point in time, want to be talking about adding indicators for all many multitudes of activities that the city government does. I think, as you said, that having 2 or 3, maybe 5, but probably 2 or 3 per department would be quite adequate. And it's not necessarily just the high or the low-hanging fruit, but and this is where I think the priorities come in, or what are the priority things for each department that we really want to see. What we want to see done and what we want to measure in the coming year.
If I can add there, I don't disagree with what you all are saying. What I don't want to do is get stuck down in the weeds of the department level indicators because they're tied to particular areas of the budget and lose sight of the fact that I think we have to start with the council priorities, which is everything, which is the whole city, which is the overall view, and kind of once we've got the broad piece in place, get down into those other levels, but we can't lose sight of that broad picture.
I know that Bruce Baker, with his indicators project, would look at indicators beyond what we're doing in the city, that they would be demographic, based on the broader population of our city. And so, in that sense, there are indicators for how we as a city are doing, which are more departmental. How many programs of this type were offered and so forth. And then there are indicators for the entire city. And I'm also thinking about, I'll say the words, our foreign policy, how we interact with jurisdictions outside our borders, and whether that constitutes a success or not. How we've dealt with Montgomery County, how we've done with our with the rebate formula and so forth, or what kind of rebates are coming back to us from the larger county that we are in, or even Prince George's County, because that's crucial to how we work with New Hampshire Avenue and try to promote the economic revitalization along there. So there, I don't have what those indicators might be, but I have that sense of if we're going to be successful outside our borders, that's yet another kind. So maybe it's helpful for us to think in those terms of how are we as a city doing, how are our constituents and our population doing, and then how are we doing vis-a-vis the outside world. But I hear you about the budget link, indicators which would link to the budget, and from the cities, from our own, I agree that from our own priorities, sustainability, livable community, and engaged, responsive, and service-oriented organization, the departments ought to think hard on that and and help us determine what kind of measures or indicators would be most helpful to them, to us, and to budget time. So I agree in principle too.
But I think the indicators is the wrong end of the thing to start. I think we should be starting at the level of goals,
deciding how to measure those goals.
Okay. What? Speak up. Speak up, speak up.
I guess when we get around the table here, we feel this intimate need to whisper to each other. I very much agree with what Ruben said, that I think as much as possible, we should drive those key indicators down to the budget areas. And I think it's only when we're trying to measure a goal that is really hard to specify in one departmental area. Might we want to have some global indicators? So in the examples here, I think in the last priority, which was the engaged, responsive, and service-oriented organization, and the key indicators, I started to talk more about specific departments and how they could be measured individually. But I do think there's going to be examples of things like if we decide that addressing the city, not only city government, but the city at large, greenhouse gas and carbon footprint issues, that's something I think is hard to measure at a department by department level. And we have to be careful not only to measure, I think if you look and we only focus on measuring things at the department by department level, we could get into sort of a year-to-year slightly myopic view of what needs to be done. And I do sort of a business analogy of like the guys who were making buggies at the turn of the century. They were thinking, yeah, I'm making the best buggy out there, and then someone came along and created the car, and being the best at making the buggy was irrelevant basically after 10 years. And so I think those larger goals and larger indicators will be some of those things that will help us to stay up at the 20,000 foot level for some of the time.
And as you were talking and as Dan was talking, bringing up foreign policy, what I was thinking about was getting too hung up on department level stuff kind of keeps it in the building, and we have to be thinking about the Tacoma Langley CDA, the Old Town Business Association, residents and the various entities that we deal with, and partnering with them, getting letting them know what the priorities are, getting their input, and some of the items that came up earlier in the discussion about, was there matching stuff about the two items, that as we think about sharing resources with those entities, that it's a whole lot easier to think about the priorities in the strategic plan if we keep all of that in mind and don't get too focused down on the individual departments. It has its place. It ties in with the budget nicely, and it has a large part of what we're doing. But we got to get back up and make sure that we've got that we're inclusive in those priorities, that we've got those set, and just work down to those other levels.
Well, I actually disagree a little bit there, Bruce, because if an activity, I bet you are, if you have an activity that you want the city to do, such as you indicated several, working with the county, then one can imagine creating performance indicators for, we had a goal that these things should happen, and then you have an indicator of whether they did in fact happen and how well they did it. Because then the following year you say, gee, we tried doing X, Y, and Z and it didn't work out very well, and then we have an actual performance indicator of what you mean by it didn't work out very well. Rather than a sort of touchy-feely, we said we're going to work with PG County and we think we did an okay job, but if you don't have any indicators of how well you did, any predetermined goals, it's hard to know what to do the following year, not the following year, but a couple of years later when you
kind of gives staff clearer direction for the current year.
I wasn't saying no indicators.
Okay, I was just trying to clarify that. I don't mean literally budget. I really mean more activity or function of the city.
And as you were talking, it struck me that maybe there need to be some indicators for the council.
Oh, I'd love to have some indicators for the council.
That would be good. Yeah.
Good.
How about council meetings to be limited?
I work at the Small Business Development Center for Maryland in what they call the Capital Region, which is Montgomery and Prince George's County, and they just went through a couple-year exercise in getting indicators in place for all of the different regions in the state. And the acronym is HPLS, High Performance Leadership System. Yet another acronym. And there was a lot of resistance to putting measures in place. But the measures are in place, and they do have weekly meetings with higher level staff and the regional directors, and it has been a help. At the same time, the SBDC uses stories a lot. They call them success stories, to try to get a sense of, are they on the right track in meeting the goals that they have and empowering small and local businesses around the state. So there are different tasks for different purposes. One's for management, and the other is for kind of inspiration and knowing that you're on the right path. So I see a place for both of those things.
And maybe my first proposed indicator for the council will be at a good place to wrap this discussion up within 1 hour.
That's a good indicator. Wow. An hour from now, or an hour from when we start?
An hour from right now.
Okay.
In that case, can I ask the question of what is it that we expect that the outcome is going to be from this specific hour?
That we will have agreed on the priorities, and that we will have brought them down to a level of specificity that we're comfortable with, that the staff can work with and come back to us with additional questions. And we'll be a lot closer to running this out for comment from the public.
Is it just the priority projects, or is it all of the assumptions?
The more successful we are, the more of that there will be.
Can I make a suggestion there? I think if we get into the details of, like, I think this assumption and you think that assumption, that would probably devolve into the wrong level of discussion. But I think we should more try and focus on those, to start with, those three in bold that are on each page break about the sustainability, livable communities, and engage, responsive, and service-oriented.
Well, we agreed to those a long time ago.
Right, we agreed to them, but what do those mean? So if we could get some common understanding, I think, about what those mean, and then also the sort of the strategies and priority projects within an hour, I think would be in good shape.
Good, because it would take me at least an hour to go over the issues that I have with the assumptions around the housing stuff.
Great.
I'll just take that home.
And I volunteer if people have individual smaller comments, feedback, to take that, email it to me, or we can sit on the phone and kind of incorporate that together.
I like this. It's very nice. Thank you for all the work that you've put into it. You're laughing, but I'm serious.
I was waiting for you.
You have to speak up. We didn't hear that. Josh.
I said I was waiting for the other shoe to drop.
Oh, okay.
That was really pretty much all I was going to say. I was going to ask Ruben if he brought a copy. You brought a copy of the one that we did from before?
Yeah, a copy for everybody.
Could I see it?
Sure.
I just want to look and see which strategic approaches dropped out in this, but the structure is very nice. It flows very nicely. And I agree with Ruben's comments about the full indicators structure and those issues.
And then you want to do the matrix then too?
Yes, I would love to see the matrix too. Did we get same thing? More of these. Do we need more of these?
Just one?
Hand them out to the audience.
There's 3 pages and it's got.
Is there one of the originals
I have new
also?
glasses in my
Josh?
shirts.
Did you have one of the
New
stapled ones?
progressive lenses.
An extra one?
It's going around.
I'm trying to focus. I have this. I don't have the matrix.
Those are the two items, right?
Yeah,
How many,
just two.
the matrix is three,
and
Ruben?
the goals.
Pardon me?
Do you have 3 pages for the matrix thing?
Yeah.
You have an extra one?
Yeah, I don't have one. Thank you.
You getting what you need over there?
Is,
Yeah, we have an extra one.
I was going to ask if there's somebody who has the information on the tip of their tongue as to the differences between these, and that might be Josh?
Yeah. I think it's mainly in layout, and this is more, my graph is more specific about what assumptions are, but both items have, I think, what's just sort of at the heart of this, which is what are the strategies and what are the priority projects. I think when Colleen and Ruben and Terry did, we weren't even talking about key indicators yet, so that's not in there yet.
Yeah, we weren't. And we didn't do the assumptions either.
Right.
Too much.
So, and I went through this, but I think the version I had was also trimmed off in a funny way or something, so I'm not sure if I took notes correctly on that version. So I tried to incorporate most things, so anything that was not incorporated was not sort of an intentional anyway.
I'm going to bring the SBDC back into this mix one time, because I think there are some lessons there. Because they have measures, they derive those measures in part from a database, an online database, which all of the counselors use. And as each counselor provides service to a small business, they log a good number of details about that business, and how long the meeting was for, and the content of the meeting, and so forth. And so, from that online database, there are reports which feed the measures, and that database is well known across the state. Everybody uses it. It's something that they have to do after each meeting that they have. And being a database guy, and thinking about measures and how we would do that, my mind immediately goes to, well, how would we count this? And who's going to enter the data? And then how would the reports be run? And that sort of thing. So I'm in the weeds in a sense, but I'm thinking about it above the weeds from a structural perspective. And I don't know that we need to nail that down tonight, but I think it's something that we ought to be thinking about. If we develop 50 measures or 20 measures, who's entering that data and how are they doing it?
Right.
Terry's volunteered to do it all?
Yes, I said I agree with you.
Oh. Okay, good.
Well, I think as a general strategy, it seems unreasonable to think that the council would be able to identify all the necessary assumptions, strategies, and key indicators, even if we had more time than we actually have for this. So, to me, it seems more like an exercise that would guide the city manager and staff in coming back to us with a refined version of this, that we're providing guidance and in some detail. And then some of these things may turn out to be unworkable on the part of the city, or may take more time and energy than they deserve or we're willing to spend. So to me, for example, we have 10 priority projects under sustainability. I can't imagine we do them all in 1 year anyway. Some of them seem like they're longer-term strategies as well. So we might divide them up. We wouldn't do number X this year, but number X would be done next year, kind of thing. And I'm perfectly willing to have the city manager and their staff do that kind of exercise. So I think if we focused on, are these kind of the three priorities, if we thought in general these were a good selection of assumptions, and we thought the strategies were more or less on track, and projects and so on were more or less on track, then letting the city manager and her staff work through a concrete version of it, I think would be great, great accomplishment myself.
And I'd like to invite the city manager and the deputy city manager to weigh in with any thoughts, observations, comments at this point.
You know, I think we've talked about this before, but I think the key for me and Suzanne, and I think the rest of the staff, is just to have a sense of what the council's policy priorities are, and truthfully where you want to get, what does success look like. And I know that's fairly simplistic, but I think some of that, I think I can sit with the staff and try to figure out what those strategies might be, or getting the council's ideas about projects. But it's really important to me to know where you ultimately want to get.
Right. And knowing how we're going to measure that is another.
It's another
beneficial
piece,
thing,
I
yeah.
think,
Right.
kind of down the road.
Once you know, once we all kind of agree on, a desired outcome of
Right.
for that year, for that priority, for that, then it's easy to kind of, not easy, but it's easier to identify what's we should measure, what should we count, what should we report back on. And so in some senses, you kind of need to know what the success is so that you then know how to count if you back to it or not.
I know I'm kind of partial to what we've done so far with the recreation department, that it sets out some specific goals, and it's kind of what I had in mind for each of the department areas. That would be provide some helpful guidance to the city staff, but also give us something to measure, a yardstick to measure things against as we allocate resources during the budgeting process.
What would one of these goals look like?
I was going to ask you for your assumptions on, you had some comments on the assumptions.
On the housing?
Is that where they've done the housing one, under sustainability?
Yeah, it's on the housing.
Okay.
You're working from your
From Josh.
or Josh's?
From Josh's. We didn't put
We
assumptions.
didn't do assumptions.
We didn't do assumptions. So I would agree up to, I think there's a sort of secondary assumption in D.
You're on page 2, right?
Yeah, page 207. Nothing is done to the property tax rate. Property taxes will continue to rise on homeowners as the 10% increase cap catches up with the assessments. These percentage increases will far exceed the rate of inflation and the percentage increase of average household income for the city. It's not necessarily a bad thing that there are time periods where the assessment, where the increases are flat and the assessments catch up, because you're always in a market where the assessments are going up at a higher rate than what the cap is. Then you get a real skew in what kind of property tax people are paying. And so you'll have one neighbor who's paying $2,500 a year in property taxes and another neighbor who's paying $6,000. And so the time periods where it's flat, you start to get actually more equity across the tax base. And so as that's increasing, you actually do get extra revenues from that process, which relieves the upward pressure on the tax rate that has the most significant impact on the most recent purchases. Ruben's nodding, so at least I'm half brain dead.
The new folks can't afford yet another tax increase because they already came in at the 6,000 as opposed to the 25 that the people who have lived here for a while are still at.
Right.
And so as the years pass and the housing values stay flat, the 2,500ers go up to the 6,000 people, and the 6,000 stay where they are, which is good
Right.
for them because they are already paying an extra.
Because the value of their assessment is catching up, essentially. So if your house is appraised at $600,000, and you have two identical houses, but you moved in when the houses were selling for 600, but you moved in when the houses were selling for 50,000. And since you only increased 10% a year, it's 10 years later, this one's 600,000, this one's only appraised at 250.
So from an equitable perspective as regards our constituents, a flat market is good. Is that what you're saying?
Well, there are advantages to it.
Yeah,
Just that
a flat
it
market
closes
allows you to
this-
catch up.
Yeah, allows us this.
Allows the people who are,
The government to catch up.
Yeah, I see that.
It allows the difference between the tax rates of neighbors who are in like houses
Tax
to come,
rates, not tax rates.
I'm sorry, the taxes to come closer together. You
Got
know, the trade-off that you're making when you develop a property tax cap like that, if my high school math teacher is listening, I'm sure he's laughing because
Not listening.
I never did this kind of stuff when I was a kid. But so the trade-off that you have made is that if you buy in before the market takes off and you've maxed out everything you've got, and the next year the market takes off at 20% or something, it helps with housing stability and housing cost stability for people. But the trade-off is in volatile markets, you get a skew in the fairness, essentially, of what different people are paying for essentially the same delivery of services. It doesn't have
Right.
anything to do with how much money you make, but only essentially the luck of the draw, the time frame in
that
which
you
you bought
bought
your
in.
house.
And if the property values go down, then there's a lag, assessments catch up with it eventually, but that makes the speed at which things even out for the two neighbors quicker, right?
Yes,
Because-
if property assessments went down and you had your house reassessed, then it would bring you
So you need
closer
3
together.
years of declining property values, or be in the first year of that it's going down.
Anyway, Colleen's larger point is that these are phrased quite specifically, and the situation is fairly complex in Tacoma Park, I think.
Which pointed me toward the fact that, to the extent that we put the assumptions in here, every year we would have to review the assumptions to see if the assumptions changed, but it's helpful to know what the assumptions were, which drove certain decisions to be made. And recognizing when the assumptions have changed, the decisions that those drove might need to change.
And
To
I guess,
recognize it, and the thing I was thinking of was the assumptions that were made when rent stabilization was initiated about what the market was going to be doing and how that changed over time.
yes, absolutely. And what I would add to this is that this last comment about the socioeconomic diversity of the city, I think a lot of that is driven by the interplay between how rent stabilization works and the impact that it has on property values and rental rates and the purchase housing market and the impact that has on what the tax rate has to be for the purchase housing market. And so I would argue that there's a trade-off between the affordability that is created in the rental market and the pressure on the tax rate on the home ownership market because of the artificially suppressed tax rate on the rental properties. And they're artificially suppressed because the value of those units is suppressed because of the ability to sell them is affected by the cap rate that you can get for a loan, which is based on a percentage of the total cost of operating the units. And without making a value judgment on it,
That's assumption E.
it creates a, I'm sorry?
That's assumption E. Assumption E talks about that basically, that issue. Not
Yeah.
the interplay, but the fact that
Also
rent
restrains the value of the
stabilization,
rental
it doesn't put a value
property.
judgment on, but rent stabilization retards or restrains the tax rate, tax interplay.
And it has an impact on the
On the affordability of the purchase housing.
on the affordability of the purchase housing that we've never addressed.
The empirical issue, though, is that I've been watching property values in Tacoma Park, and you hardly argue that they're,
Suppressed.
yeah.
No, but that's
But that's not the argument.
Colleen's point is more,
She's making an argument that it's less than it otherwise would be.
In the
Counterfactual.
rental market.
Yeah, and the issue for me is, I think it makes Tacoma Park, I think you could argue that having diversity in the community, having affordable housing in the community, and so on, make it a more desirable place. One of the things that that makes Tacoma Park different from the rest of Montgomery County, for example, makes it more desirable. So I think that on the
But
one hand,
that's the value judgment. What I'm just saying is that the
well,
economic
property
dynamic.
values are reflecting the preference people have for Tacoma
I know,
Park,
but that's-
so that there's two forces. My point is there are two forces in action. The economic one you indicated, in which rental property is less than it otherwise would be. The value of the property is less than otherwise would be because of rent stabilization. And on the other hand, you have the sort of advantages of people wanting to live in Tacoma Park, raising property values.
Right, so where's the affordability in the home ownership market?
that's the point she
Yeah,
was making, is
that's the
yeah,
one
that's the
here.
point.
that's the
problem.
point she was making, was that it makes affordable home ownership harder because
Right.
you have the property value issue, and on top of that, you have a higher tax rate because everyone who's in a home is de facto subsidizing the lower, the reduced. So it
Right.
does, you have economic diversity, but it also gets separated
I
by
think-
rental versus home.
I think
It tends
that-
to accentuate that difference.
Right.
But I
Drive-
think that's,
drive to the
I think
limits
that's
of the
overwhelmed
extremes.
by, I think that's a small effect relative to the preference for living in Tacoma Park. The effect of that on property value. We have a fixed supply of housing, not owner-occupied housing in Tacoma Park. And a lot of people want to live here. And I think.
No, but we're not
that
saying it
aspect
retards the
of it-
property values, we're saying that what it does is it creates a situation where lower-income people who want to live in Tacoma Park have one choice, and that's rental. And wealthier people buy houses.
Right.
And so you have this strange socioeconomic
Yeah.
bifurcation almost of the housing markets, and that doesn't really doesn't help us integrate the city because those properties are usually geographically in different places. And also
Not my word.
is a weird sort of element that you basically are saying, if you want to live in Tacoma Park and you don't have that much money, you can't own a home, which is also.
Yeah, it plays out, on our street, it plays out, there's a young couple who's just moved in, and they're shocked at how much their monthly bill is on property tax.
I'd like to, just for reference purposes, see the neighborhood or the community inside the beltway of the Washington metropolitan area that does it better than we do.
Yeah, that's good. That does it better.
That does it better, that has the wide diversity of residents and home ownership than what we have.
And I think Colleen's argument was a little different. I appreciate yours, Terry, but I think Colleen's argument is that it could be, if it's not already, and this is a judgment call, is it a problem or not? But it could become a problem. And it certainly causes pressure on low-income folks who want to own a home. And live
Somehow all these condo conversions kind of fit into that equation somehow. too.
Sure, because it's under sustainability. So,
Right.
whether you're talking about, all these other issues about, the diversity and different things like that, under the sustainability issue, you've got these market forces that are going forward. And we actually, the one tool that is also an outcome of this process, for better or for worse, again, without placing a judgment on it, for better or for worse, an outcome of this process is the condo conversion pressure. And so, if you're in a rental unit and it gets converted to a condominium or gets sold in home ownership to become a home ownership unit, and it gets sold essentially at the rate as if it were to continue to be a rental unit, then that's kind of like hitting the jackpot as a renter, because then you get a house or a condo or some living unit in Tacoma Park, but your mortgage is based on what the rental unit cost is, which is great for you, but it comes at a cost to the city, that's another unit of rental housing that's lost. And so if we're thinking about sustainability, we get more money, but your argument about, but the trade-off there is the diversity issue. So, and then, how long do those, it's a lot of the people, we have some great stories about people who stayed for a long time. People sell them, and then they're just a home ownership unit, then like every other home ownership unit. And so that's all I'm saying, is that there's a complexity to this mechanism that has played out over the years that I think was not foreseeable when it was initiated, and that we should evaluate what that means for us and where we're going forward, and if there's anything that we can do about it.
And I think the important thing that I take away from this discussion is that it points up the fact that as we work toward the affordability goal, to the example that you were talking about, to the extent that rental housing is more affordable, it can have an adverse effect on the affordability of the owner-occupied housing, and to the extent that that drives the market for those to the extremes, it reduces the diversity in the city and makes it harder to integrate, if that's another goal of what we're trying to do, of bringing the various pieces of the city together, and not have these kind of separate groups who don't talk to each other very much. So that we've got various things going on that are goals that are, to a certain extent, working against each other. And if we recognize that, it may be easier to try and not have that be the case.
Right, and recognizing it is important. At the same time, in Langley Park, for example, there are a lot of people who have lower income. Some are homeowners, some aren't. Langley Park, Adelphi, and all our surrounding jurisdictions, particularly in Prince George's County. If we want to continue to have a mix of incomes here, then maybe we need to reach out farther. I mean, that's, in a way, that's providing services to people who don't live here, but if the rec department if we agreed on how the rec department was pricing things and we made it attractive to people from other places, we have the ability to increase our service areas. So that doesn't quite resolve the housing problems, but it does push toward having a mix of income levels for who we serve.
Other comments?
Okay.
You were right. You had quite a bit of comment on the assumptions. So I think making those assumptions a bit more general might be, in the middle, might be a good idea.
Making it C, D, and E, or D, E, and F, you mean?
Yeah.
Making it more general?
I see no problem in calling out the assumptions as they are, as long as we recognize that we're going to have to revisit them, because the longer time period you go, the more they're going to be invalid. As the economy does something different, as housing prices do something different, some people suggest that it may well be, a turnaround in name your time period. But that's going to change an awful lot of assumptions. It could change assessments. It could change a whole lot of things. And people have to be prepared to kind of adjust.
Well, the only reason these aren't really, they're not quite assumptions. They ought to be kind of realities. If we have the policies we have, then these are the result. Right? Based on what we have right now, these are the result. Property taxes on rental housing will rise very slowly. That's probably not going to change, given the fact that...
No, but this is an assumption because we're predicting the future.
Well, if we have rent stabilization and there's a certain increase in the rents that landlords can charge, then their rental units are not going to be, their assessments aren't going to rise unless, I mean, I suppose that could change, but given market forces, I don't see how.
Well, I don't know. I have a constituent in my neighborhood who complained bitterly about how much she had to pay for. She ended up paying for a rental property. In her case,
You mean for rent or for purchase?
no, for purchase when she purchased the house. In her case,
Oh,
it was
but-
made problematic because she didn't know about rent control,
Right.
and nobody told her. And I won't get into the details of this because it's a very unfortunate situation. But
Oh, I'm sorry, I have to catch up. She bought a house in
she bought a rental unit, a
rental building?
building,
Oh, okay.
4-unit building,
Okay, and she was shocked at how much,
6-unit building.
and how expensive it was.
She was both shocked at how expensive it was, but she managed by taking a mortgage out on her house in addition to a loan from the bank.
She was even more shocked when we found out we had rent, she found out we had rent stabilization,
Rent
right?
stabilization, she couldn't raise the rent.
Well,
So my
typically...
point is that you can sell houses in Tacoma Park for a lot of money, rental property in Tacoma Park for a lot of money.
Well, if you find an unsophisticated purchaser.
Yeah, she may have overpaid because typically the rental housing,
She
rental
overpaid
buildings...
in 2 senses. One, because she bought at the peak of the market, and 2, because she was not advised. Yes, that's true.
Well, yeah, but and here's the other problem for our community when that happens. It's not a solution out for anybody,
No, it's
except the person who was lucky enough to sell it, is that we have properties that are in foreclosure for that reason, and that's bad and affects our folks as well.
Yeah.
If I can just
But anyway,
point out that to the extent that we get hung up on the assumptions, we're not going to get to the strategies, and I think the strategies are more important for us to comment on.
I wonder if we could just step up to the level of the sustainability and ask people if, as written, that captures what they thought we were talking about when we said sustainability. Work in partnership with city residents, the business community, and other governmental agencies to ensure that Tacoma Park is financially, environmentally, and commercially sustainable for the city and its residents.
I would expand it slightly to not just city, not government agencies, but also not just the business community, but non-business community. I don't know what
Nonprofit.
what PC phrase there is. Just organizations in the community. Other, in other words,
Other
we have
organizations.
a lot of nonprofits. We have a lot of community groups in Tacoma Park who are quite active, and I think we should partner with them, not just city residents as individuals, but these organizations. Whether they're nonprofit or not is not necessarily important. So just some additional.
I think the thrust of that is right. We'll come up with the language that'll make that happen.
Yeah, in fact, we might be able to drop either financially or commercially because they're pretty kind of the same thing. And put in the word that better describes the folks that you're talking about, Ruben.
No, I actually like having financial and commercial in there.
What's the difference? I guess
Financially refers to the city, is what, at least that's what I think of it, and commercially refers to it's a good place for people to do business.
Financially also pertains to individuals.
Yeah, I'm happy with all of them.
Okay.
So you're saying more, it might say something like, work in partnership with city residents, community organizations, nonprofits, and the business community, and other governmental agencies. I wouldn't use those words, but you want to include, you want to be inclusive.
Yeah,
include
very more
those.
inclusive.
Right.
That's it.
Want to check out the language on the next high-level one?
Livable communities, work in partnership with city residents, the business community, schools, and other governmental agencies to build a city that is more livable.
Same concept.
Yeah, meaning it is safe, clean, and inclusive, with healthy residents, and convenient multi-modes of transportation within the city limits and to locations outside of the city.
I like that too. I think again, there's a lot of focus on transportation. I think livable also includes just the, I mean, you safe, clean. You know, it's hard to shorten things down to one word or lengthen other things to multi-words without shifting the balance of focus of the phraseology. But I think when people think of a livable community, it's not just transportation, it's also the environment, the appearance, I think safe and clean. I'm not sure I'd use clean. But
I always say that livable communities are vibrant, healthy, and safe.
vibrant, healthy, and safe.
That's pretty good.
That's pretty good.
Vibrant kind of includes inclusive there, probably.
Yeah. I like that better than this. Although it doesn't have any transportation.
Well, part of what makes
That was
the
the joke.
community safe, though, is, and what makes it vibrant is that it's walkable and multimodal and those kinds of things. And those are the core elements of vibrant communities, and they're diverse. You know.
So it'd be okay if it said something like, meaning it is vibrant, healthy, and safe, period.
Or you could probably integrate it into the same sentence. The first
Put a little footnote to say, see Richard Florida's work.
Yep.
Yeah.
Richard Florida. That's right.
That's a good way to do it.
Richard who?
Richard Florida.
Oh, yeah.
The next one, I think there's an extra N, by engaging the community. And
Which one you want?
engage, responsive, and
Okay.
service-oriented. And I think, and it says ensure the delivery of high-quality city services by engaging the community instead of in the community. That sounds great.
So shall we say that these with some tweaking are the language, and people will come back with particularly modifications
Yeah.
toward the Ruben's concern about the groups that are included in the mention in the first one, and I guess the second one? Or are we going to keep the second one, but mentioning of folks and then say vibrant Colleen's language?
I think Josh took notes, and he's going to get us the revised versions for,
And anybody who has revisions should get them to Josh this week.
okay, I have a question. And that is, how do we get from here to kind of the budget formatted, or the budget level? Or is this, we talked about discussing the things at the higher level, the 20,000-foot level.
We're working down there. We're
Yeah, I'm just trying-
descending.
I understand that that's the goal, that's where we're headed. I just wondered if anybody had any thoughts on how
Yeah, we only have 23 minutes to
we
get there.
descend without,
My thought about that was that when we get to the actual priority projects, those are the things that could get driven into the budget. There's going to be some back and forth with the city manager and us about realistically what can be done based on non-core service expenditures to deliver on those things and the
right, okay, and that's exactly where I think my thoughts run in a different line than what you just said. And that is, I think that some of what I had hoped to see out of this is core services too. And these are, I think some of the core services, we should be identifying goals for within the budget.
Sure, sorry, yes. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, so there's, I guess, there's things that are,
Things that are
Connected
coming in
to
from
core
the higher vision, but there are also some just mainstream work that we have to do that are
Yes.
goal driven also.
yeah. Right, like to make the community, I know that police are not the only thing that make the community safe, but to make the community safe, police are going to have to be a big, particular type of safety, police are going to have to be a big part of that. That's a core service, it doesn't necessarily require special money, project money outside of that.
Right. And that this isn't just talking about special money.
Right.
If I can check with the city manager at this point, is there any particular thing that is a question that you're just dying to ask us?
Not particularly, really just been trying to take in the discussion.
Okay.
I think, and trying to get a sense
I
of
know
what you
sometimes,
might want from us, I think, and how we can be helpful.
right, I just know sometimes at the ends of these discussions, you have certain feelings about what we did or did not accomplish and wish we had done something, and I want to give you the opportunity to put whatever that might be, if there is anything, out there while there's still time to do it.
Not really. I think, Suzanne, did you have anything?
No, I mean, to me, I keep going back to what is a success, and so it's interesting for me to kind of think through what's been prepared here. It's very helpful, and a lot of detail to think about. You know, to me, if we're looking at sustainability and we're looking at you know, an environmentally sustainable community, you know, what do we count to show that we're better next year? And to me, that's, you know, how do we know we're better next year is the important thing for me. And I'm not sure the greenhouse gas emissions, if that's the right answer, or if it's that by next year there's an environmental plan that everybody's agreed to, or, you know, it could be a variety of kinds of things, but it'd be nice to know as you go through this what you think is a success.
Well, on that one, I think the priority project of moving to 100% renewable electricity, it's fairly straightforward to estimate a reduction in greenhouse gases from that. So while I would prefer a different indicator, I can imagine measuring it this way. My indicator would be more directly tied to Public Works coming up with a plan for moving to 100% renewable energy, you know, whatever phase in that would be. But it's, to me, some of these projects, well, most of the projects, you could come up with concrete you would take the project and elaborate it, because in some cases, these are multi-year projects, and you'd say, okay, so in year one, we're going to do this, in year two, we're going to do this, in year three, we're going to do that, and then you can usually come up with an indicator to match each of those.
And that's
And it may be that in that case, it's easier to say, move toward 100%. And that way, when you know the cost of moving toward 100%, it's a whole lot easier to make a decision whether you want to go all the way in 1 year, or whether it's part of a series of decisions where you decide that it's going to be incremental there and incremental somewhere else, or whether it's worth the big push in the context of things to make that expenditure in 1 year, make that goal, strike it off the list, and move on to something else.
Yeah, exactly.
I think the one comment, I think as you all kind of talk about strategies, and I know in talking to some of the staff, and I think someone mentioned this earlier tonight, I would also not just look at what the city can do, but what are things that we as a community are going to do. And I think one of the things I talked to Daryl about, and kind of get to Susie's point about what you can count, is recycling. I mean, the city can certainly offer opportunities, but I think part of being a more sustainable community and a more livable community isn't just the actions the city takes. In many cases, we can facilitate, but it also takes the community itself making certain steps. So I don't think there's anything wrong with trying to set goals that aren't just things that we're going to do, but also talk about how we're going to facilitate the community and other partners being involved.
And I'm a big believer in that the city should leverage itself
Right.
in exactly that fashion.
And how we extend recycling to businesses and the
Right.
multifamily.
Yeah, I'm not saying we don't have a role, but I don't think it's entirely our role.
And both of those are good points, and I think energy use. This is a good example. Going to 100% renewable resources is good, but actually reducing our use of energy is maybe better, or certainly good also. and getting everybody to recycle everything that they've got, that they can, is good. But generating less recyclable material is also a good idea. So, and I completely agree with you that leveraging what the city does and getting the community at large to follow suit or help work in partnership would give us a huge impact. So that's kind of where the stories are. Well, what stories can we tell about the city and what it's doing, and how could we? But let's make sure that we do more than just. Let's make sure that we pick stories or pick things to address that are real. I mean, not to lessen the impact of 100% renewable energy use, but if we don't reduce energy use, we're just sort of trying to cap and trade our way out of the problem, and that's not good enough.
One of the interesting things the city did that I hope it will expand was having that green building forum, where, relatively speaking, city expenses, let's call it, were, fairly low, but a lot of residents came and got a lot out of it. We really leveraged that. It's a great idea. I think doing similar sorts of stuff would help residents.
Although, again, I think using that as an example, I think community members could have done even more of the organizing of that.
Yeah.
It was a very good event, and I think that I would like to see more volunteer work on that particular forum.
It's a good example, too, leveraging the volunteer efforts in our city.
I guess I'm also torn a little bit when I hear that question. My inclination is first to say, well, let's focus on outcomes. So I only care about the Green Building Conference to the degree that it actually reduces the carbon footprint, whether it's because people conserve more or because they put a windmill in their house. That's ultimately what I care about. And so, to Barb's point, I only care about the city should take action, and if they take action to convince residents through education or what have you to recycle more, then did the recycling percentage go up if that's the measure, or even more importantly, did we not produce non-recyclable trash? Whatever the measures are. But I understand also that some of those things can be glacial, and for the city staff also knowing, okay, in this year, what exactly am I supposed to, what does success look like? And
That's a good
wanting to have some things there that might be, one of the indicators is, did you actually do the climate change plan this year?
But I think
But I think there's a little bit of a balance. We need some of each, and I definitely think we need those indicators that are ultimately outcome.
Yeah, and I think part of the difficulty is, I don't know that we're always going to know what the cause and effect is. I mean, we may do a green building conference, and I will say there was a considerable amount of time put into that by the HCD staff, and I think part of the question that I would have is, do we know what the outcome of that was? It had very high attendance, but did it change people's conduct? And truthfully, would the council have preferred that the HCD staff spent that time, which was considerable, on some economic development project? I mean, there are trade-offs. We've had a lot of discussions with staff about public safety, and there's things like education, and there's actions the police take. I think we've been getting to I know something that's important to you in terms of tying it to the budget. I think sometimes, especially when you're talking about safety and people's perception of that, I'm not sure we're necessarily going to be able to say, well, we did this and that changed this. Sometimes it may be a series of actions, but we're not really sure which one changed people's perception of how safe they feel in a neighborhood.
And one of the ways that we have of getting at that information is the resident survey.
It'll tell us how people feel. I don't know it's going to be able to tell us why they feel that way. And
There's another.
maybe it doesn't matter why they feel,
And
good or bad.
I had residents tell me, they never see the police cars. when I was out campaigning last time. It just drove me nuts because
You're walking around.
I'm walking around and the police are going by every couple hours, and it's like every resident is telling me, I never see the police cars. We need more police present in the neighborhood. I'm thinking, I don't know, I think I see it kind of growing.
Well, there's a lot of them.
And a quick aside on that, at the meeting, what was it now, 2 weeks ago, with the two groups that are bringing the restaurants into Old Town, the police provided a little quick update at the beginning and said that there were some more bicycle patrols and foot patrols, and they said of the 50 people in the room, how many of you have seen a city policeman, I think it was either on bicycle or on foot, and a third to a half of the room raised their hands.
Wow.
So
So you got to do the numbers.
But none of them from Ward 5.
That'd be right.
There was some people from Ward
there
5.
were people from all over the city.
Yeah. Another story is that when Kathy Plevy started putting out her voluminous reports, some people were kind of shocked. Oh my God, there's so much crime. But at the same time, people's anxiety level went down because they felt, oh, well, the police is responding. I'm learning, I'm being educated. So you get these other kind of ironic balances.
And seeing some results of people being caught, which you didn't
Yes.
necessarily see before.
They would
Yeah, the
never.
arrest
And
reports
they
for
were
the
all in the
different.
other ward, so my residents were really happy.
Either you're very safe or the police aren't there at all.
Yes.
I would like to go back to Josh's point, though, that I think, there are different types of things that we're talking about, and I think, though, that we do need some indicators that are very specific for budgeting purposes, which are really things that city staff has as guidance to how they're going to be measured
Right.
for performance against the budget. And that's different than some of the other measurements that we talk about that are more, what I see as being community indicators, which is more of the Bruce Baker approach to things.
What would one of those look like? What would a budget?
Let me just
I think the safety, how, an indicator might be, what's the level of safety that people feel in their neighborhoods.
That's relating to the budget?
It's not related to the
Okay,
budget.
what would a one that related to the budget look like in your mind?
We read an article that said that a certain kind of police patrol reduced car theft or, muggings. And so the police department put in place that program, and so then we measure something related to that kind of crime.
So it's measurement of car theft. So
In
that's
that case, that's a-
based on and that what's the linkage to the budget?
Well, because you have a specific activity that the police did, and did it
We
have
put
an
money in
impact?
the budget for this particular type of patrol,
Okay, they needed a special.
or a special.
Additional training, or, whatever the money might be for.
So you're
equipment.
relating it. Okay. So
Kind
they
of
they
tied
asked specifically in the budget for this thing that was funded.
Okay.
They
We have
implemented
a crime
it.
analyst.
You
know,
go
we
back
have,
to yeah.
We got to ask for a crime analyst. Well, we could have, we didn't, but we could have tied that to some kind of performance indicator of whether having a crime analyst
Accomplished a goal.
accomplished a goal, whatever we said the goal was and how we measured it.
And that doesn't mean that everything works at that level by any means, but
Yeah, I don't
but
think so.
you have a few key things within an area, a business area, whether it be police or a department or whatever, that you do want some emphasis put on, and you want to be able to know whether you've been successful. Barb wants to know how we're going to know that we were successful, so that she doesn't feel like she's going to do a great job. And at the end of the year, we say, well, no, you didn't make it. And it's like, well, based on what? Well, the indicator is based on what it's based on.
I guess, the thing that's an interesting balance here has to do with the difference between indicators that we see advancing your goals, because there's certain of those that, we'd like to feel like we're helping advance your goal. That's part of our challenge. Then there's plenty of things that we are either individually or as a unit evaluated on all the time internally, and that and some of which show up in the budget document each year. And I think we've agreed we want to flesh out more and have some more specifics. but I think, there really are these different kinds of things that you look at. There's, are we picking up trash the most efficient way possible versus are we helping keep a clean community, which might be a whole community effort. And it's the more that, we feel like we're meeting your ultimate goals for the community, the more that we're able to also kind of filter that down to some of the even
Right.
more internal management tools.
And I think sometimes they fall into both categories. I think this was before, Dan, I think you were on the council, but staff had approached the council about adding a second code enforcement officer. I mean, that also feeds into what did that additional officer do in terms of making the community more livable, but there's the practical, how many more inspections were we able to do? Did it allow us to more quickly close cases? Because, I mean,
Yeah, and some of this,
That's a great example.
yeah, and I think, it would have been, we were going back in time, but kind of where the council seems to be now, report back in a year and tell us, what did you do with the position we gave you, and the council could make a determination, obviously subject to union contracts and other things, about layoffs, but, do you want to continue was it worth the investment of time and money to add that position? I mean, I think that's probably an easy example for me to
Yeah, I think it's a good example, and to me, it also indicates that in some cases, you might want to have a 2-year time frame, because it'll take a while to hire and train and get up to speed a person, and you don't really see the impact until, the following year. And so you want to make sure when you set the whole thing up, that you didn't set it up for failure by saying, no, you have to hire, train, and have this guy, walk on water all in the same year. It's just not, that's
we
just
make
not-
them do that.
make him do that.
Yeah, and I think one of the things.
Well, I want him walking up the stairs and knocking on the doors, not walking on
But
water.
it is a good example of should the measure be about the outcome, again, like cases closed, or summonses, whatever the term is, violations issued. I don't really care if the person's great at issuing violations if the cases never end up getting closed,
Yeah, and truly, our objective is not to write citations, it's
Right.
to get compliance.
Right.
And I don't know that the outcome you're looking for is more people in jail, more convictions. I think the outcome you're looking for is less crime.
Right,
Cleaner
right,
community.
exactly.
Right. But you'd have to develop an indicator that did what you wanted rather than the wrong.
Right, so it may be less citations, but more understanding that everybody understands that citations are possible.
Or on a resident survey, people saying, our
Right.
neighborhood's cleaner. I mean, there's,
Yeah,
I don't
there-
know which of those, or it might be a couple that we have to try and see what's the right measure for
It's just,
something.
I don't see how the resident survey could be tied to something as specific as an additional code enforcement.
No, but if you're looking at a general picture, I mean, I think that's one thing you might reference.
I think what we've agreed to
That's what Bruce
here,
Baker's gonna do.
and
You know,
without
community
explicitly
indicators.
saying it is, we've agreed that there are different levels of these things, and that just as there are different levels of things we need to define, there are different levels of indicators we need to measure things.
And I want to say one thing about indicators, because I work in an office where we have these indicators. I would like them to be, for the city to feel like they actually can meet these. So I'm not looking for indicators that,
Right.
like Superman unattainable indicators. I'm looking for ones that are actually can be accomplished.
And I'm happy to have phased indicators so that you recognize that there isn't going to be attainment in the first year, but it's part of a 5-year goal to get to a bigger level.
Yeah, and back to the SBDC, some of the stuff that they're required to meet come from the federal government, come from the SBA, and some are based in common sense, and some are not, and then some are put in place and never met, and others are far surpassed because somebody figured out how to do it right. So that's not an exact science either.
And I think we want to be careful, I mean, we've said this a lot, just to have not that many indicators,
Yes,
particularly when you get to the
right.
environmental level, because part of the philosophy is that people will do what you measure. And if you have 15 things for them to be measured on.
That's all they're gonna do this year.
Right, then they're not going to know sort of, okay, where's the priority within what they're trying to measure me on.
And people are quick to sense what's real and what's phony too. I mean, if it's just an indicator for an indicator's sake, that doesn't serve anybody.
And I would say that from a historical perspective, one of the constants that I've seen in now close to the end of 15 years sitting on the council is that there's a tendency for staff to recognize that the council is good at adding tasks to do
Yes.
and not necessarily saying what priority fell out the bottom. And so to the extent that we can keep the indicators manageable, keep the tasks manageable, and be able to recognize that for every priority added, another one drops out off the list, everybody will be happier. And it's 9:29 on the clock.
We're done.
I guess as we wrap up, I mean, obviously, I think council knows, I mean, we want to try to help you move this process along, but we don't want to control it, and we're not trying to interfere with it, but I mean, we, I think, had a pretty good discussion. I think Suzanne and I have a decent sense of where you're trying to get. Is there something you would like staff to do at this point? I mean, we kind of have an idea of what your 3 goals are. You seem to have defined your policy statements in terms of kind of what you're trying to get at. Is there anything that you would like us to tackle?
I know what I'd like to see. I'd love to see a discussion of, by you and the royal you. You and your
Staff.
thousands of staff.
Oh, but that we're so rude.
That's a budget discussion.
Yeah.
That's why I said it that way. To what is here.
Okay.
What do you like? What do you don't like? What needs additional clarification?
And maybe a sketch of what you think might work.
Well, I was going to say, obviously we have a management team meeting coming up. Would the county, there's 2 different models here, so it would be helpful to know if there's, I mean, they're fairly similar.
There's 2 different models, and what I really see needs to be done is, and that's where I was asked earlier, is how do we kind of integrate these models so that they flow? I think there is some from the very high level that Josh has put together. There should be a flow to the others, but then there are more operational things in the other model.
Right.
And I think they both go together, but I don't know that it's really, that we're really ready for staff to spend time doing that yet, or is,
I'll leave that to you. I mean,
Yeah.
you can certainly take a shot at it.
When's the management team meeting?
Actually, we're going to have it on the 18th.
Yeah,
so
it's the
it's a
week
couple
after
weeks.
next.
So how about the suggestion is that I will edit this based on the comments that I heard, and then also people should look at the previous version done and tell me anything I missed or you want me to incorporate, because I don't think in here there's actually things that are at a more detailed level than some of the things that are actually in here when you get down to priority projects. Obviously, we have too many items ultimately on the priority projects to be done in 1 or even 2 years.
Yes.
But if we get all that together, then maybe we can say, okay, this is our best thinking so far, and then we can give it to staff and say, what's your...
right, that's kind of where I am, is I feel like we need to refine our own thoughts further before we have you spend a whole lot of time on it.
So,
I'd rather have you spending the time, formalizing
Right.
what we talk about, rather than, coming off with, well, is this what you meant, and then coming back and you go, no, we were over here. And,
Yeah, we'd rather have a better sense.
and I don't think we're ready to say that we're over here, so.
So can we commit by the end of next week, people will either, by the end of a week from now, by next council meeting, people will either have emailed me or had a phone conversation with me, or in person if we want, so that I can incorporate your comments. Then I'll get that back out to everybody, and that would mean that you'd have a week to, maybe it takes me a day or 2 to get all that stuff in, roughly a week to digest and say, yes, I'm okay with that, make any final comments, and that should put us pretty close to the 18th, so that then there will be a finished product.
Yeah, that'd be good. I would just like to try to get it out to the management team maybe a couple of days in advance of the meeting, maybe like, about 2 weeks from yesterday or something, so they have a few days before the meeting, so they can all kind of think about it on their own before we pull it together as a group. Well,
So you want any comments we have by Friday, so you have the weekend to work on it? Is that what you're saying?
ideally, if I said next Monday, but I do, Friday, if the earlier you can get them to me, the better for me, because it just,
And the task is to look through both the 3 documents and fill in blanks and mix and match and stuff like that.
and anything in your brain.
And anything else that pops out, okay. Watch out. Careful what you wish for.
I won't be able to do it by Friday.
The following month, and can you do it by a week from now?
I can do it on the weekend.
Yeah,
Yeah, because you have a little bit of time on Monday to work on it?
yes. So why don't we say beginning of the day, Monday,
Okay.
the 8th?
Yeah,
Sunday night, beginning Monday latest.
and
And
we can send something out to Doug to let him know.
Jesse was just pointing out that, I mean, if the council wants to, it looks like right now there may be some time on the agenda for the 15th. So, I mean, if you wanted to come back as a group and talk about it, it does look like there may be some time for you to do so.
I like doing it in public, so I think that's a
Will
good
you,
idea.
will you be here?
Yeah, I'll be here.
Okay.
Yep.
All right,
Okay.
then,
What are you saying?
we will now move to the last item on our agenda, which is to vote to go into closed session. We have a proposed closed session to vote to receive a briefing from the city manager on a personnel matter regarding separation of the city employee and the related investigation pursuant to annotated Code of Maryland, State Government Article Section 10-508A1. I don't have my glasses on. II. Would somebody like to move that?
Second.
That was moved by,
Councilmember Wright, seconded
I
by
gotta
Councilmember
write it down on my phone.
Third.
Who was the second? Wright and,
Seaman.
all those in favor, please raise a hand. Any opposed? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in favor. So we are adjourned.